Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this lecture. Now, in this series of lectures, we'll explore the theories of economic management in traditional Chinese culture. Now, some may say that economics is a modern concept, isn't it? I mean, indeed. This discipline was first formally defined by the Scottish philosopher Adam Smith in 1776 as an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Also, this subject of economics was also first called political economy. Now, in the late 19th century, British economist Alfred Marshall changed the name to economics as a shorter term for economic science. Now, during the last 300 years, economics has evolved into many different branches, as you know. For example, microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and later on, behavioral economics, etc. But all in all, economics is essentially a social science that studies the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, and it looks at the behavior and interactions of economic agents and how economies work. Now, economics as a subject has only been in existence for 300 years. However, a human society and human interaction existed long before the word economics was ever invented. If we look carefully into the vast volume of Chinese classics and traditional texts, we surprisingly find ourselves in the ocean of sages' teaching of economics and governance. Now, the Chinese history, with written record, dated back to more than 5,000 years ago. Now, during this time, countries and societies arose and disappeared. The great rulers harnessed the human nature, and they were, praised by countless generations, while the ruthless kings destroyed their regime, and they were despised by the people. Also, the good conduct and excellent governance were carefully recorded and studied by the great scholars, and also practiced by generations of kings and noble families. But the bad conduct was also recorded and studied by the scholars, and they were used as a warning light for future generations. So, in traditional Chinese culture, economics is not an alien subject, but quite an ancient subject, I would say. Now, the economic theories have been extracted from hundreds of years of practice and experiment, not on a computer, of course, but with real people. Now, as you will see, the classics and texts not only provide us with theoretical deductions, but also stories and explanations. In modern scientific terminology, we can say that these traditional texts have all the meat and bones of scientific research, such as hypothesis development, data gathering, not only time series data, but also panel data that involves many countries at different time, hypothesis testing, and conclusion. But the most important thing about traditional Chinese teaching is that the ancient sages recognized that economics is fundamentally a social science, which is about people. Now, this is because the improvement of economic condition is ultimately based on the improvement of human nature through education. In traditional teachings, topics such as economics, ethics, sociology, and education are one entity, and usually appear in the same chapter or the same book. Now, the advantage of such a knowledge system, if you like, is that it prevents the downside of the partition system of modern teaching. For example, an overemphasis on the rate of return, or GDP, combined with neglecting human development, can result in a deterioration of the economic indicators in the long term. In contrast, for instance, the principle discussed under the topic of family management can be well applied in sociology and country governance. The Analytics of Confucius, as you may already know, is composed of a collection of sayings and ideas attributed to Confucius and his contemporaries. The sayings were compiled and written by Confucius' followers. This book has 20 chapters on the topics such as ethical conduct, rights and music, managing state affairs, discussion of the past kings and their mistakes, personal conduct and appearance, views about the people Confucius met during his traveling, and so on. Now, there's not a single word about economics in the Analytics. So we might think mistakenly that Confucius has never talked about economics. However, Zhao Pu, who was the prime minister who helped Emperor Taizu to establish the Song dynasty, he said that I helped the first emperor to win the world with half of the Analytics, and used the other half to help the second emperor to govern the world. Now, since the governance of the country and the world is essentially the management of economic life itself, we can never deny the power of economic teaching embedded in these traditional texts. So I say it is suffice to say that ignoring these ancient teachings is a huge loss for humanity. The honorary professor of University of Queensland and Griffith University of Australia, also the founder of the Buddhist Education Foundation, the Venerable Master Chin Kung, once said, "To save the world from conflict, we must restudy the traditional Chinese culture. Chinese culture is one based on harmony and peace, and the political and economic governance is driven by the improvement of human nature, harmony, and enlightenment. So it is not only valuable teaching for the rest of the world, but extremely precious for Chinese leaders themselves today." When a young child has a problem, he always naturally turns to his parents, right? But when we have difficult problems, who shall we turn to for answers? Well, the teaching of the ancient sages have been ignored and cast aside for 200 years. Now, despite of the technological advancement of the modern world, conflicts have only been on the rising path, and the increasing wealth doesn't really replace the emptiness of the mind. So, on both individual level and country level, the confrontation between let's say, the wealthy and the poor, it has never been so severed. There's something wrong with our economic teaching, I would say. Not all of it, of course, but as you will see in this lecture, the core of economic teaching must be centered around human nature. And human nature is good. Human nature is not about competition, it's not about crushing your competitors so that we can survive, but it's one of kindness, a harmony, and coexistence. If there's anything wrong with human, it is habit, not nature. Our economic policy should be driven not by our habits, but by our nature. This is the only way to bring back economic harmony and world peace. And there is a lot to learn, I think, from traditional Chinese culture. Now, as I said before, the style of writing of traditional texts is rather different from modern textbooks. So to help modern learners and policymakers to make the most out of these valuable teachings, we extract relevant content from these texts and rearrange according to the general framework of modern economics teaching. In other words, the teaching materials are not classics-oriented, but content-oriented. Now, we will investigate topics such as consumptions, productions, distributions, which pretty much mirror the modern knowledge system. Now, as a researcher in modern economics and corporate finance myself, I am blown away by how much we can learn from traditional Chinese culture. I'm not blowing my own trumpet just because I am a Chinese person myself. In fact, as a researcher, it is the searching for solution that drives my work. But what I can tell you is that the teaching of a traditional Chinese culture is not out of date. Quite the contrary. It provides proven solutions to the modern problems. I am very much in debt to the Venerable Master's tremendous effort in revitalizing the teaching of traditional Chinese culture. I remember the Master once said, the key is to put what we have learned into use. This is called the modernization of traditional teaching. So there is no such thing as, I would say, time barrier or country barrier. I mean, human nature is human nature. So the delivery of this course is also oriented by practice and use. And we should always keep in mind just how we can incorporate the traditional teaching into modern policy making. I mean, after all, when Zhao Pu successfully used the Analytics to assist the building of the Song dynasty or the Song Empire, it was already 1400 years after the Analytics was completed. Now, another 1,000 years have passed since Zhao Pu. We modern human still worry about the same economic life as our ancestors did. The traditional Chinese culture is a combination of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, as some of you may already know. Now, we must make it crystal clear from the beginning that the three branches can never, ever be treated as entirely different religions. No, they're not. The Venerable Master Ching Kung has emphasized on numerous occasions that the three teachings are only different in the form, but the idea and the content are already fused together. The Taoist masters read the Buddhist sutras and also the classics of Confucius, the Mencius. The Confucians also read the Buddhist sutras and Taoist classics. Now, because of the time limit, in terms of classics and texts, we intentionally select most of the materials from Confucian classics. Now, also, because we want to make direct reference to ancient political and economic teaching, it is more suitable for our purpose to design our teaching material with some constraint.